And once again, we're back together. So we're looking at question 2 from that Technical Maths paper 2, May, June 2024. So please, if you haven't subscribed, make sure you're part of the family. Right, let's get right into it. They say in the diagram below, O is the center of the circle, right, at the origin. There's our center over there. They say ML is a tangent to the circle at point M, right, which is -5 and 12. So that's that point over there. They say L, and L is the y-intercept of ML. All right, so let's see. This is the line ML. There's L, which is the y-intercept. And they also tell us that D is -3 and 0 is a point on the y-axis, as well as that beta is the angle of inclination of MD. Right, let's get into it. They say to us, determine the equation of the circle, right? So first of all, we need to find out, okay, what is the radius. So we know that our center is at 0, 0, right? So we need to find out what would be the radius. Well, there's a point on the circumference in this case, which is -5 and 12. So I can say, well, let's find out what r is over there. So I'm going to say, using Pythagoras, right, that's going to be r squared is equals to x squared plus y squared. And so the x value is -5 squared. The y value is 12 squared. And this is going to give us 25 plus 144. Okay, and that's going to be 169. But if we take the square root, in fact, r squared is actually 169, which in fact will give us the equation of the circle. So this is going to be x squared plus y squared, which is equal to r squared. But we've just found out that r squared is 169. All right, now the next question says, determine the equation of tangent ML in the form y is equal to. Right, now, how can we get that equation? Now, remember, we've got a theorem that postulates that if we've got a line from the center, it will be perpendicular to the tangent, right? So the radius, the tan radius theorem, tan perpendicular to radius. So that should be 90 degrees. So that should be 90 degrees. Let me just indicate it there. And so that means that the product of their gradients should be equal to -1. So let me find out what is the gradient of OM. So the gradient of OM, right? So let's say YO minus YM divided by, or rather, let me put it the other way around, not that it matters, minus YO divided by XM minus XO. It's just easier for us to put the zeros at the end. Okay, so that's going to be 12 minus 0 divided by -5 minus 0. So that gives us -12 over 5. Now that's the gradient of that line OM. So what does that mean? It means that the gradient of OM multiplied by the gradient of ML should be equal to -1. The reason for that is that OM is perpendicular to ML. Okay, in fact, let's write down the reason. That's the tan perpendicular to radius theorem. Okay, right, so that's what we get for that. So therefore, what does that tell us? Now, please remember, when two lines are perpendicular, the product of their gradient is -1, but what it essentially means is that the gradient of the other one will be the inverse of the other with a different sign, right? So if that was 12 over 5, so the gradient of ML, or yeah, let's say ML would be equal to 5 over 12. That's the inverse, and the different sign there, OM had a negative sign, this one would have a positive sign. Now, we're not done. We've just found the gradient of the line ML, right? So all we need to do now is determine what is the entire equation. So which means it's y is equals to 5 over 12 x, right, plus c. But there is a point that we know that the line passes through. That's point M, right? So we know when y is 12, okay, that's 5 over 12, x is negative 5. All right, so if we work it out, we're going to have 5 over 12 multiplied by negative 5. So that would be minus 25 over 12 plus c is equal to 12. All right, let's try and work it out quickly. So that means that's 12 plus 25 over 12. And when we take it to the other side, it becomes positive. So I got a value for c being equal to 169 over 12. So, which means that the equation of this line would be y is equal to 5 over 12 x plus 169 over 12. All right, guys, 5 over 12. Let's not ruin it. Okay, so that's the equation of the line ML. All right, now let's go to the next point. They say to us, write down the coordinates of L. So that's the y-intercept of that line. We've just found out. Remember, at the y-intercept, we know that x would be equal to 0. So I can substitute 0 in that equation, and all we're going to go to get is y is equal to 169 over 12. Remember that the constant of the straight line, right, once we put it in standard form, gives us the y-intercept. So the coordinates of L would simply be, this is where x is 0 and y is 169 over 12. All right, so that's how the cookie crumbles. And then they say to us, determine the size of beta. Right, so now we want to find out how, what is the angle beta. So let's just remove those lines there. Right, so what we'd need to do is get the gradient, okay? So if we know the gradient, then we can use in this case the tangent. So I'm going to first determine the gradient over there. Going to say, well, the gradient of MD, okay, the gradient of MD, that's ym minus yd divided by xm minus xd. Right, so I've got 12 minus 0 divided by that's going to be negative 5 minus negative 3. So we get 12 divided by, so that's negative 5 plus 3, which gives us negative 2. So that's 12 divided by negative 2, and I'm expecting a negative gradient. So that gradient looks like is going to be negative 6, okay? But we know that the gradient, okay, of any line is equal to the tangent, okay? So that's going to be the tangent of the angle beta. Right, now I want you guys to keep in mind in this case, because we have a negative gradient, which means we are going to get this angle over here. So all we need to do is subtract 180. So we're going to say negative 6, okay, is equal to the tan of beta. And so beta would be equal to the arctan of -6. And in this case, let's get that calculator there. Right, so we're saying shift the tangent of -6. And that gives us -80, as I did say, that we are getting this angle on this side. So what we need to do to get the angle, we're going to just add 180 degrees. And so beta will be equal to 99.46 degrees. That's the angle beta. And I hope that's clear, guys. Right, so we said 99.46. Right, so that it doesn't become all messy. Let's just remove some of the stuff that we already did. Right, and then the last question, they say to us, draw on the grid provided in the answer book the graph defined by. Okay, so you've got this graph, which is x squared over 3 squared, and you've got y squared over 36, which is equal to 1. All right, so to draw this kind of a graph, we would need to do two things. Firstly, let's make x, or rather, let's make y 0. So, and find the y-intercept. So our y-intercept would be where x is equal to 0. So that means I'm going to have x squared over 9 plus y squared over 36 equal to 1. But remember we said x is 0, so I'm going to substitute 0 squared there. So meaning this whole term falls off, right? So I've got y squared over 36 is equal to 1. But we can cross multiply. I'll have y squared, that's 1 over 1, so that's y squared is equal to 36, and so that will give us y is equal to plus or minus 6. So firstly, okay, I don't have the grid. I would have been able to draw it quite nicely. Right, so which means on our y-intercept we've got 6 and -6. Okay. And what about our x-intercept? We're going to say for the x-intercept, we know that y is equal to 0. Now, that means that we're going to do exactly the same thing on that equation, x squared over 9, okay, and y squared over 36. So that means in this case, I'm going to be left with x squared over 9 is equal to 1 if I make y equal to 0. So that means that x again is going to be plus or minus 3. Remember, you are cross multiplying there, right? And so you get x squared is equal to 9, right? And so when you take the square root, x is equal to plus or minus 3, right? So now that means that's going to be kind of an elliptic, not kind of, it is going to be an oblong elliptic diagram. Okay, so I've tried my best there. Of course, you're going to have -3 on this side, going to have 3 there, that's going to be 6, as well as -6 at the bottom. Please don't forget to label your x's. And ladies and gents, that is how the cookie crumbles. That is 15 marks that you would have earned yourself on that question. For now, let's leave it there. We're going to pick it up on question 3. I'll see you guys again next time. Sharp, sharp.